welcome. I am Tim and this is Ballot X. It's full speed ahead, ladies and gentlemen, to Election Day, and that is the day when we all get to have our say on who runs the country for the next 5 years. What will determine your vote, though? What are your topics that you hold most dear? And for those entering the voting pool for the first time, what are your expectations before, on, and after Election Day? Here with me, we have 5 youth leaders joining me with the discussion. And as we navigate these questions, we'll touch on a few topics that have been central to the election campaigns. Many young people say, my little one vote ain't gonna change nothing. Today, we can give many examples, however, of how youth participation has impacted elections or policies in TNT. Here is a quick breakdown of the topics we will be discussing. 1. Finance. Health. National security. That's a good one. Everybody's interested in that one. Education. The importance of voting. And many other discussions will be held right here with my 5 companions. Now, speaking of my 5 companions, I spoke about them already, and I think it's about that time that I introduce them to you guys. Okay, today we have Khaleem Trevor Ali. Now, Khaleem is an attorney at law, international human rights advocate, and global youth leader with experience across the Caribbean, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. He currently serves as the International Relations Secretary of the Commonwealth Youth Council, representing young people from 56 nations, and he's definitely here to represent. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a round of applause. Up next, we have Darrion M. Narine. Now, Darrion is a proud Trinbagonian with a global mindset, a dynamic innovator, project specialist, and creative strategist, passionate about socio-cultural development, civic engagement, and social transformation. With a career that bridges the arts, public policy, and human development, Darrion brings a unique lens to national conversations around governance and the future of Trinidad and Tobago. And I love the color of his shirt, my favorite color. Give him a round of applause, please. Up next, we have Reneé Atwell. Now, Reneé is an attorney at law and international relations professional with a strong focus on youth empowerment, gender equality, and criminal justice. With over 5 years of legal experience, she currently serves as a public defender in Trinidad and Tobago, advocating for access to justice for underserved communities. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Reneé a round of applause. Up next, we have Kemuel Pascall. Kemuel is a 24 former national, regional, and Commonwealth Youth Parliament and television show host. Kemuel is passionate about youth development and communication, having studied journalism. He is also a youth advocate who has always championed the need for youth to be at the table. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Kemuel a round of applause. And last but certainly not least, we have Mikhael Campbell. Mikhael, affectionately known by his peers and community as Mr. Committed, is first and foremost a man grounded in faith, worship, and fellowship in Christ. He is a devoted husband to the love of his life, Andrea Campbell, and a passionate servant leader who has dedicated over 10 years to the service of his community and country. Throughout his journey, Mr. Campbell has humbly served in various organizations, including the Trinidad and Tobago Cadet Force, Tunapuna Community Council, the Tunapuna Youth Desk, Youth Government of Trinidad and Tobago, and he's here to serve on this committee here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Mikhael a round of applause. Now, I love how you're sticking that, you know, the devoted husband and that type of thing. Yes, big up you. Nice. Now that you're familiar with the panel, let's begin. Drum roll, please. Yes, failure with the drum roll. All right. Now, first, let's touch on the importance of voting. Question number 1. If young people don't vote, who benefits the most? The people or the politician? Who wants to jump in with this one? I choose you, my favorite color. Yes.
I like how you said that. You know, I choose you just like Pokemon. In my opinion, I think that politicians tend to benefit the most when young people don't activate and get into the voting. I see this happening time and time again. You see, if we really think back, right, and we look at the start of the democratic process, there are a few people from that generation who are still alive currently, and they're not going to give up their vote at all. They are going to the ballot no matter what. And I don't know what the experience of the panelists have been, but in my experience, that particular generation who was around during that time and probably a couple of decades afterwards, they selected their party then that they're supporting for the elections, and it's very rare for them to make a change. They're going to vote that party in particular. The new generation, however, now, I think that is coming up, is where you have a lot more of the population who are thinking about voting in different ways. And voting not necessarily just on party loyalty, or my granny or my tanty used to vote there, but voting instead on what the policies are, on what is being offered, and thinking a little bit more critically. Now, it have another issue inside there that's loaded, but I don't want to get into that too much, which is voter.
Why not? That's what we're here for.
But I want to give everybody else a little chance to
All
chime
right, fair
in
enough,
too,
fair
you
enough.
know?
Continue.
But voter apathy, and I think I'll throw that out, and I don't know if any of the other panelists want to take that up. But you know, there's that generation now that's coming up, the younger generation who we're seeing. There's a level of dissatisfaction and disillusionment with the current political climate. And therefore, you would see some people not going to the ballots because of that. So, and the benefit really comes to the politicians in a case like that who want to secure, especially in marginals. You don't want people who not necessarily just party loyal, voting in the marginals if you're a politician. You want people who going out to vote to make sure that they're voting for your party in specific, right? So that is where there's a little bit of a danger there to politicians, and I think the politicians stand to benefit the most.
Excellent answer. I agree. Now, guys, you know you're always hearing something, whether you're coming up wherever you are in Trinidad and Tobago, that here what's going on. If you don't vote, then you can't complain, right? But is it fair to complain about bad governance if you don't participate in the electoral process? Why or why not? Let's start at the front.
Well, I think this question is a double-edged sword. You have to start by considering, why are young people not interested in exercising their right to vote? And as Darrion mentioned in his answer previously, there is now a culture of voter apathy. Young people have reached a point where they don't feel as if their vote matters or their vote doesn't mean anything. And so not voting has become a way of rebelling against a system that has failed you. Right? So that is how some people look at it. Now, the flip side to that argument is, if you want change, you have to be a part of the process. You can't stand on the margins and criticize. And you know, there's this old age adage that the line of doers is always shorter than the line of those who have the most to say. And so when you look at it from that perspective, you then have to consider, okay, if you really want change and you want meaningful change, then you have to be a part of the process. So I think, you know, just looking at the question generally, people, of course, have a right to criticize. People, of course, have a right to complain. This is a democratic society, and that is a right that they have. But at the same time, if you're not willing to take part in the process and you're not willing to engage in either shaping that process, then why are you complaining?
Interesting point of view. So in other words, vote for your opportunity to have a say, whether you had the say you wanted to say or not.
More in terms of understand the value of your vote and what your vote means, and in understanding the value, having that knowledge of what your vote means, exercise it. Now, we have to consider the fact that, let's put this on the table, right?
Go ahead.
What do you think the answer would have been if we had on our ballot paper no confidence or abstain as an option for people to vote? Then perhaps those same people who aren't voting would go out and vote, and that might be the decision that they would make. But when you have people who, one, don't trust the system, two, they don't directly or personally benefit from the system, they're not going to be incentivized to vote. They've grown up and they've seen government come, government go, election happen, and nothing in their individual life changes. So not voting has become, like I said earlier, a way of rebellion. But at the same time, I think it boils down to people don't understand the value and the importance of their vote. And I think if we had more conversations about that and an appreciation for that, then we would have more people voting and criticizing as opposed to people not voting and criticizing.
I actually just wanted to jump in and probably ask Khaleem a question here. So you said about the no confidence and the abstaining. How you feel about, like, for example, the spoil the ballot movement that has been picking up some traction now? People are saying, well, if you at least go out and vote, but spoil the ballot.
I think, that is also an option that is available to young people. Everyone, of course, is going to have their own opinion on whether or not, taking part in a process just to spoil the ballots at the end of the day is even worth it.
Just to put a pin in you there for just a moment and pause. But spoil your ballot. Explain that to the audience. Because some of them, that may fly over some of our heads, including mine. So,
All right, so you go into the booth, you stain your finger, but you don't put it by any box or anything. You do exactly the opposite of what it says on the paper. And that is actually something that some of the other Caribbean countries you'd find people doing. In fact, in Jamaica, some of the people who go in to vote in the ballot boxes there, they would spoil the ballot and then write an essay in the ballot box
That's
about
the
why. Yeah, which is very interesting. So that's what it is.
interesting. Now, continue.
Yeah, so as Darren mentioned, spoil your ballot is something that has become popular in some Caribbean countries and in even other countries around the world. And I think that is where people recognize that even though I don't support any political party or option that is available to me, I value and understand the importance of engaging in the process. And so perhaps if me spoiling my ballot is perceived as no confidence or a lack of trust in what is publicly available, but I still exercise my democratic right and understand that this is a right that maybe decades ago I wouldn't have even had in the beginning.
Okay, now growing up and to add to the conversation, love where we're going. Adding to it now, growing up where I grew up in Diego Martin, you would hear a lot of the younger people in Diego Martin be like, well, we live in what you want to say, or for want of a better phrase, a safe seat. So my vote don't count anyway, because why voting for, they're going to vote for A or B, anyway you take it. So who can speak towards that and that whole thing about being in a safe seat and therefore your vote is no longer important? Reneé?
Sure. Well, my constituency is a safe seat. And I actually recently had that conversation with a few persons in my constituency who said, well, because I'm a big advocate for voting. And so I tried to influence persons to go out and vote, make your choice. But people was like, listen, we're living in a safe seat. What sense does it make? And I think that that's where we come in as advocates, as youth advocates, as civil society advocates in holding our governments accountable and our members of parliament accountable. Because I think one of the things that we forget is that we elect them to represent us. And I think that what may be lacking in Trinidad and Tobago that I have heard parliamentarians from other Caribbean islands talk about is better processes to hold our MPs accountable. I went to a Caribbean parliamentary workshop in December of last year, and one of the parliamentarians from across, I can't remember which island it was, but they said that they have like monthly town halls where persons from within that particular party of government go into the communities and people could come out and give their critique of that member of parliament. So what are they doing, what are they not doing, etc. And that is what we should essentially see. So even if you do, for example, live in a constituency that is a safe seat, and you do vote for that person or you don't vote for that person, there still needs to be mechanisms to hold our MPs accountable, which I think may be lacking in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think that the burden would be on persons who are advocates, civil society and otherwise, to really advocate for better procedures to hold our MPs accountable, whether it's a safe seat or a marginal.
Accountability, a great point. Another?
Add something quickly to what Reneé said too, and in terms of like the theme of this discussion, I think that there's now need to reevaluate this concept of safe seat and this concept of marginal seat. No seat should be considered a safe seat. No politician should feel entitled to representing a group of people. They have to earn the right to represent that group of people, and they have to be voted in by that group of people. And I want to, pose it this way. No seat is a safe seat if everybody goes out and vote, because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know what the external and internal factors are going to be that will influence the decision that community is going to make. But at the end of the day, as long as we have a narrative that safe seats in our political system and in political systems around the world are something that is okay and something that we just are comfortable with, things aren't going to change. Because why am I going to change anything if I know I'm going to end up back here anyway?
So allow me to chime in as well. Reneé mentioned that she lives in a safe seat, while I may live in a marginal seat. And just to answer the question from my perspective, any young person saying that their vote don't matter because they're living in a safe seat, that statement we need to educate them, and here's why. Once I vote, it means that I have a responsibility to come to ask you, what are you doing? Because I vote for you based on a particular policy or based on, we had a conversation and I said, I want the young persons to go a particular direction in this constituency. So, and you could tell them, I dipped my finger for you and therefore I have a right to ask you what is taking place. So that should be the conversation happening at this point in time, to tell them, your vote matters, because it gives you an example. One of my friends named Khaleem, he did a post talking about, you want to go down the islands. And he was talking about all your friends and they gathering to vote on who should be the boat driver, who doing the cooking and the food, the life jacket, the full works. But you opt to say, Narine, what about the other side? And you're going down to the, it's called the ferry, the dock, or the
jetty.
The jetty, correct. And you recognize that the man who going and sail this boat have one eye and one foot and he hand barely could work. The paler went tasting good and there's no life jacket. What you going to say then? And that was really relatable because all of us like to go down the islands, right? So in that sense, people who live in safe seat, no, they had a vote. And in my case, where in a marginal seat, it makes it even more important because now we will call it swing seat, or it could go to either party A, B, or C. And at the end of it, it's important that all of us should participate. I love Ali's point in terms of the fact he said, no seat should be considered a safe seat. But if we are in, the reality is, that is how it is in the States, it is in UK, and in Trinidad and Tobago, and it will take people like us on the panel here to actually keep pushing that conversation for no seat to be a safe seat.
On the topic of safe seat, the only way how we are going to get out of that idea of there being a safe seat is if we actually educate people about going out and vote, and not just parties calling on people to come out and vote, but also civil groups and organizations actually going out and educating people on why their vote is important. Because you have constituencies like Togo Sangrandi, for instance, where a couple thousands of people may come out, but the amount of persons that are eligible in that constituency is almost 30,000 persons that are eligible to vote. And so if they were all to come out, or 85% or 90% of those persons were to come out and vote, then that idea of there being a safe seat or a marginal seat would not necessarily be, because all those persons who are eligible to vote, they have different ideas in their head as to who should be their representative. And in many instances, especially in this election, they are not just one candidate or two candidates from the main parties. They are, for example, the new seat Arangwe's St. Joseph, that has 5 candidates running, and all of them have different ideas and different options. And so if every person who are eligible in that constituency were to come out and vote on the persons that present themselves before them, there would be nothing such as that safe seat or that like marginal seat as we put it.
Well said, lovely answers from all our panelists. Now, going forward with that, a little bit off on a tangent from the safe seat idea, there's also the notion of what voting have in it for me as a young person growing up in a community, apart from the fact of you being in a safe seat. Let's say you're not in a safe seat, but plenty of young people argue the point that they don't see the direct effects of voting trickling down to them where they are on the corner maybe, and I hate to always use the word on the corner and young people because it make all of us feel like if we didn't go to school and we didn't get jobs and do, But yes, but just for want of a better phrase, on the corner or wherever you are, how does voting affect the young person?
So let me tell you a story. There was a point in time that I was on the box lunch list in primary school.
Me too. The roti on a Friday, oh boy.
The best. If I get the batch, you buy breakfast, so I said Israel.
Yeah.
And my mom told me a month before, listen, I'm down to my last $200. And listen, from next month, you have to go on the box lunch list. So I had to go to school with a letter. Miss, mommy say I have to go on the box lunch list. That was a policy that the government put into place. I wasn't on the block, I wasn't on the corner, but I was in my short pants primary school.
Correct.
And it trickled down there. The young people who we say that is on the block or on the corner, or wherever they may be in Trinidad and Tobago,
yeah,
policies could affect you as yesterday. Because I have a young brother, and today or tomorrow, if any political party decides to say, our policy is all must pay for education from early childcare to tertiary, no government assistance, I'm not too sure if you'll be able to afford it. And that's important. That's to show how important it is to participate and even be informed as to who you're voting for and why you're voting for them. That's my story, Nancy Drew.
Well said.
I think that for me, and just adding to what has been said already as well, there's a question that comes to mind whenever somebody tells me that they don't want to go and vote. So they say, I don't want to go and vote, I don't see anything happening. For me, if I vote, my vote don't matter, etc. And I ask them, if you did not have the right to vote, would you want it? And that's always an interesting twist and take. And I think that is the question that we need to be asking right now to a lot of people who say, my vote don't matter, I don't want to vote, to the young people. I throw out that question, yeah? And whatever the answer is, it will highlight for us one of two things. Either we're going in the right direction, or either we need to reevaluate.
Imagine if you did not have the ability to vote. Would you want it? Panel?
I'd say this, right? It's almost like this saying that we have here, damn if you do, damn if you don't. And him asking that question goes immediately back to that, damn if you do, damn if you don't. Because sometimes we just take for granted, here in Trinidad, and Tobago that is, we just take for granted the opportunities that we have. And voting is one of those opportunities. And so there are places around the world where you simply, you don't have the opportunity to vote. And so that's why I continue to stress on the point that education should be priority in engaging young persons as to why their vote is important and why the policies that they vote for, don't vote for, can affect them.
I just want to add to that thought that Darrion threw out, is that you have to also consider something that is very important to me is context and history. And so we have to understand that as a people, we started from the place of we did not have the right to vote. We did not have a say in the development of our nation, in political decisions that were made. We are a people that have come out from the shadows of colonialism, slavery, indentureship, and all of the atrocities in our history. And then at some point, the right to vote was given to us. It wasn't even seen as something that was inherent to us, but it was something that was given to us. And I'm not saying that this is going to happen or that this is likely to happen, but we must always consider the fact that because the right to vote was given to us, can it be taken away? And if we think of it like that, should we then appreciate the fact that our ancestors died, suffered, for us to be able to have the right to vote today? And is it something that we should be squandering, or is it something that we should hold close to our hearts?
Interesting questions, and let's get into some more right now. Matter of fact, let's get into some myths and misconceptions about voting. Now, some say all politicians are the same. Can you prove this statement true or false with real examples? Reneé, I see you smiling. You want to take this one?
That's a very challenging question. I think that many times what people on the ground see is a sort of disconnection with politicians. And many times it happens because politicians will go onto platforms and make very privileged statements that shows that they are so disconnected with the issues on the ground. So they will go onto a platform and they would say something like, well, I had a conversation with one of my constituents the other day, and that young man told me he took 2 years after graduating UE before getting a job. So you did not know that is how long it takes sometimes to get a job? And so when you go onto platforms and say things like that from a lot of different political parties, people will start to see politicians as being one and the same. I don't want to get into any specific examples. However, what I can say is that, particularly for this general election, we have different options available. I think that perhaps this election, more than any other that went by in the past, we have so many options available with parties contesting quite a lot of the seats, even though not all parties are contesting all 41 seats. And so I think it's very important for us to consider and critically assess, and Darrion spoke to it earlier, we as young people are more critical than ever. We are no longer saying, I am a so-and-so till I dead. I am affiliated with this political party because my mother voted there and my father voted there. We are now critical, and that's why it's important for us to pay attention to what is happening. Now, the reality is that when a politician goes onto a platform and they make promises, they may not be able to deliver on one or all of the promises available. And so sometimes we just have to trust, look at past history, look at the character of that particular parliamentarian, engage with them, go out there and ask them questions when they come into your constituency and vote for them. And as I said before, I'm in a quote-unquote safe seat, and I'm still waiting for somebody to come and campaign to me because nobody come to try to win my vote. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's very important for us to consider critically what options are available so that we can make an assessment of it, because otherwise we will, or it is easy for us to form the view that all politicians are one and the same, though I don't necessarily think that is true.
Kemuel, I see the gears of thought turning in your mind. Tell
Yes,
me.
I remember at my very, very first Youth Parliament session back in 2018, I'd asked the Speaker of the House this question. And I can't remember the answer offhand, but what I can tell you is that because of the many experiences and meetings that I've had with politicians over the last couple of years, I can tell you that all politicians are not the same. They are not the same, but as Mikhael mentioned earlier, only when you stain your finger for them, then you can go and ask them questions and meet them on that one-on-one level, and you will see for yourself that all politicians are not the same. That's my thoughts on this.
And in terms of that, I personally have interactions with some of my representatives, and it is one where you would see the heart of those who are there for the people, and not everyone will have that privilege. Because sometimes you will not see when, who is going to toot their horn and say, I just give somebody my last 500 as a politician. That might not look too, we will call that, you're doing good just for a stunt for the media. But I could tell you in real examples where I've seen some of them, I can't say for all, where they'd have given their last 500, where they'd have said, listen, I could give you my best, not make promises, but make strong, what you call representation to try their best to get you from point A to point B. Because the system is what it is. You would see persons go up on a platform, make a promise, but we are not as researched as a people to see if those promises are sustainable. So we get carried away by the promise. And I think that as a society, if we could spend more time researching and understanding if that promise makes sense, if it's sustainable, if it really and truly is in vision with what Trinidad and Tobago should look like, then we'll be able to decipher the sheep from the goat. Yeah.
Darrion, care to share?
I just wanted to weigh in here really quickly with the question, are all trainees the same? There are certain cultural threads that knit us together, that bring us together as a people, and that permeates the political space as well. So I think what's happening is that, for me, I agree with the panel, right? Not all politicians are the same, maybe off the stage. But you go to any political rally, and that is a performance. That is a concert, that is a fete, that is part of the cultural essence of sometimes what we like as a people. And that's what they represent, and that's how come it comes across as the same. You go on you watch any political platform, they will come out and they'll say, yes, I'm going to lead you forward, we're ready to go, we're ready to go, we're ready to... And just like you on stage, Tim, when you hype in a crowd, it's the same way they on stage hype in a crowd, right?
You could take my job.
So that's what we see. The essence of who they really are is when you actually watch them in I don't know how much people just watch Parliament channel, but I put it on sometimes and I take it in, And reality is, a lot of it might be boring, but if you really watch how they debate the policies inside there, then you can really differentiate between good politicians and politicians who just full of fluff.
Khaleem.
I mean, I agree with Darren's sentiment completely. I think a lot of people have the perception that all politicians are the same because we collectively view politicians a specific way. We see politicians as celebrities almost. We don't recognize that these persons are public servants. These people have a mandate and a responsibility to the population, but we see them as celebrities. We treat them like celebrities. We don't treat them as people who are representing us and our interests. And as Darrion mentioned, the best way to discern whether or not all politicians are the same or not is to look at the Parliament channel. Listen to what they're saying. Pay attention to who is showing up to debates, who is participating in debates, and what they are saying. And it goes back to, this whole thing of we pay attention to politics, and perhaps this is why we see all politicians as the same. We look at them through one lens. We only look at politicians in moments of bacchanal and in moments of peacock and who could this, who better, and that is what trends on social media. And let's be honest, the majority of our population knows what they know about politicians based off what they get off of social media. They don't base their opinions on what politicians do, what politicians say on a day-to-day basis. And so as long as we continue to view politicians, one, as celebrities, and two, only pay attention to the things that are, I don't know what's the correct word, but like, hype, or things that, would make you laugh or might evoke some sort of like, oh, this bacchanal kind of thing.
Pop culture.
Yeah, basically pop culture. That's where we're gonna get stuck, and we're gonna see all politicians as the same because we keep consuming politicians from the same narrative.
But do you think that the politicians are going to use a word again that I wish I could think of a better one, but forced to act in this manner because of the people that they are being in front of? In other words, the audience of Trinidad and Tobago, many can answer, that they tend to have a mentality of, okay, a politician is supposed to give me something, and I'm supposed to get something right now from this politician. So going back to Renee's point of them making promises and always being placed into the same bucket with everybody else, do you think that is forced on them because of the people, or do you think some of them just take advantage of that?
Did the chicken come before the egg, or the egg come before the chicken?
Well, I never find out that.
That is it. That's the philosophical question there, right?
Yes.
It is a cycle that goes in a circle. Both impact each other. That's my opinion on it. And therefore, it really, I mentioned in a brief before, they were doing like a little video interview outside, just to line up. And there's a theorist, an Italian theorist called Gramsci, and he talks about the organic intellectual, or the person who's able to move the grassroots, but translate their language from that ground and then transcribe it into the jargon that they use in the political sphere. And I think those people are the people who really could move and motivate others in a different way, or move ideas and concepts along, or change ideas and concepts as well. That idea of the organic intellectual. And if we watch historically, it is the organic intellectuals who really changed our democratic process, who introduced, our democratic process. They were the one who fought for our independence, for us to become a republic, etc., all these different things. So when you look at that there, those are the type of people who I think we need to be looking at for in terms of guidance and in terms of moving where we should be going as a people forward.
Yeah, I like to add this, right? Sometimes we make politicians to be things that they are not, and sometimes we don't push enough for them to be things that we need them to be. And so what I would like to say is that our politicians locally, many of them need a good lesson in humility. Because I've interacted with politicians locally, as I mentioned before, many politicians on both sides of the aisle, even in what we call third parties. I've interacted with politicians internationally, and what we get here is chalk and cheese, as we say. We will see politicians also high and mighty here, but when you go to places, you literally get politicians on the ground with you, walking with you, talking with you as normal. I've met politicians from Australia, New Zealand, different places across the world, and interact with them on a like we are sitting here, I'm sitting right next to you, having lunch at the table, and they are very, very normal. Here, I'm not saying that we need the opportunity to have that here with them, but our politicians locally, many of them need a lesson in humility.
Come to Tunapuna, a guy by the name of Esmond Ford, that's his style. And, well, not all, but that's his style. But I will say this, there's a point in time someone asked a particular, I think an MP, that she needed cat food for her cats.
Cat food for her cats.
And she said,
Right.
if I get that, I will be a happy constituent. And that is the place where we reach in Trinidad and Tobago.
Cat food.
Yeah. And now
All right.
you look at her and you're asking, but is this a real request? Is it that we reach so down to at least get a vote that we have to supply 9 cats with food? So it kind of reaches to the point as I think, is Darren?
Yes,
Darren.
Darren.
Mentioning that what comes to the chicken or the egg? Because at what point does it stop? When does it become reasonable and unreasonable? Because at the end of the day, they want to win, so they come to you with their vote. So perhaps she might get the cat food, but then that might push the bucket further down to say, well, I want you to mind my child. You know? Right.
And don't feed them cat food. Please. We've seen a shift in leadership in political parties over the years. But let's discuss what makes a good leader.
Patriot.
Patriot.
A heart for the people. A servant type of leadership. One that will come rain or sun, hot sun, they will actually put the people of Trinidad and Tobago first. One that doesn't see office as a place of trying to self-grandize themselves. You know, I see a leader that have youth on their side as well and be able to listen to the ground and also speak on an international level because you have to work on Chugam at the same time. Right. I see a leader for our country that really and truly will tell us the hard truth. And also the hard truth give us in a format that is digestible. Because sometimes, you know, you could be in leadership and you're talking a particular language that the man on the ground don't even understand. While the persons in the corporate room, they will. So he has to be diverse, she has to be diverse. A leader that really and truly will rep the red, white, and black, even if it sometimes works against his own personal will. So that means your will for Trinidad and Tobago supersedes your own personal interests. That's how I see a leader for that person.
To me, a leader within the context of Trinidad and Tobago is somebody who knows how to balance being measured with being empathetic, understanding that politics is about people, it's not about party. And in that, understanding and recognizing that I might be the person in charge, but that doesn't mean I always have the answer. Sometimes I might have to be the bigger person and look across the aisle and be willing to collaborate, be willing to work together, understanding that my duty is to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not to a political party, not to a political agenda. I think true leadership is measured in a person's character and their willingness to listen, to collaborate, and be open to systems of accountability and transparency.
Reneé?
I just wanted to touch a little bit on what Khaleem said in terms of collaboration, because when we look at the current state of our parliament over the past few years, we don't really see a level of collaboration. And when I envision a new politics for Trinidad and Tobago, that is what I am hopeful for. And a few of us were having a discussion before the panel started today, and we were discussing the possibility of one of the quote-unquote third parties winning a possible seat or two in the upcoming general election. What would that look like? How would that foster more collaboration among politicians? Because right now we see many of the times when they have to vote for legislation, you have the government voting, they have the majority, they get through. Everybody on the opposition bench is voting against. And when you have the rare chance when someone from the opposition bench decides to support something that the government proposes, we see the ramifications of that. So I think collaboration is so important, and that is what I want to see going forward for Trinidad and Tobago, a leader that fosters that level of collaboration, of course acknowledging that the opposition plays a very critical role in how our country is governed, and they're not just there for opposing everything, but they're there to hold the government accountable in how the country is being managed.
Accountability, Mr. Pascall.
Yes. When I heard the question, I immediately thought about Karine Ash's song this year, A Leader, because she sang about that at the Dimash this year. And
You could sing a little piece.
unfortunately not today.
All right, go ahead.
Yes. But to me, in Trinidad and Tobago context, a leader has to be one that not just serves the people, but one that understands the needs of the people, one that is able to motivate, one that's able to mobilize people and get them from one place to another. And so, in this country, we've had a lot of politicians talking the talk, but they haven't been walking the walk. And so, a leader has to walk the walk in the Trinidad and Tobago context.
Mr. Narine.
Just listening to what my panelists have said and how the conversation has gone, there's a theme that has come out of everybody's language here and everybody's answer, and that's people-centered leadership. So you're looking at one, working with your ops, with your opponents inside there. Yeah. So being able to function and work with them, but also working internally. We've seen a breakdown sometimes with internal organization and stuff of people who are involved in politics, and then being able to work with the people on the ground and people in all sects of society as well. So with your business owners associations, for the manufacturing sector, with public servants, with oil workers, with all these different people. And I think that's essential. You need people-centered leadership and people with a strong understanding of social justice.
Right, so we've touched on what is a good leader, but My follow-up question is, should a good leader focus more on what young people want right now or on what's best for the country in the long run? Khaleem?
I think the answer to that question is both. Because you have a responsibility to govern today, but to govern in a manner that seeks the best interest of the future of Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't think those two things are distinguishable or divisible. Young people have certain priorities today that must be met, that decisions must be made on. And the reality of the situation is that a lot of what young people are calling for today and what young people want to see today have future implications. As you know, you would hear people say time and time again, governance is not about the present. Governance is about the future. The decisions we make today, we don't necessarily feel the impact of them immediately. We feel the impact in years to come. But that should not stop a party from saying, okay, I need to think about what is in the best interest of the future, but not give anything to young people today or not do anything for young people today. And when I say give, I don't mean hand anything out to them, just to clarify. I mean, administer a mandate that young people own because they voted for you, they've given you a mandate, you need to return on that. But in the same time, and there's the thing is, one could always, like I said earlier, be measured. You can look at what young people want today and find ways to turn that into something sustainable, something that has a lasting impact for future generations, for young people to come. So I think it is a balancing approach. I don't think it is a either or.
Care to share?
Yeah, what says or who says that young people don't want what's sustainable for the country? And that's what I got from when I first heard the question. Young people do want what's best for the country and do want things to be done in a sustainable way going forward. And I think it's only when politicians come down from where they are and speak to the young people and give them a seat at the table, then they'll be able to judge and to say what we actually have to say or be able to see if what our plans are actually sustainable for the country going forward.
I'll just add here very quickly. One of the things that I've noticed is that very often conversations around the future of the country takes place in silos. So young people will be on one side of the conversation. People who've been working for quite some time will be in another conversation. And then you have all these pockets of silos all over the place. But one of the things I've been trying to advocate for with a lot of my work is intergenerational dialogue. The reason why I have been able to accomplish certain things in my profession is because of people who are sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 decades older than me. And from sitting down and having those conversations with them gave me insight into how I was to move forward. So the conversation around the future of the country is a combination of everybody in the same room.
By now, I think, I agree in what you just said, Darren, in terms of when the conversations happening in silos. But I also want to highlight the fact that the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, they have a strong relationship, I should say a partnership with the Trinidad and Tobago Youth Council. And I recognize as well, if you look at the amount of programs I will use the word belt out. It's not public information, I believe, but a lot of those programs are youth motivated. From hairdressing to nails to barbering to operating a crane to learn how to do construction. These programs was not just in a room with the seniors and say, well, I think they want this. I think the approach we have seen is that we want the beneficiaries to be a part of the process going forward. So when it is created, we have an all-in approach. So I think more of that is required. I've seen it in that ministry. So I think more of that is required so that, as Kemuel mentioned, you would have the young people saying that this is what and where I want to see the country, and I think we should start with pushing. You know how much our hairdressers make? The plait of hair, bro?
I know.
So those types of programs, if you put my mom in that room, she would say, go on to medicine, go on to law. So it had to have a youth element in the conversation, which there was, to push us in that direction. So just look for more and hope for more.
Look for more and hope for more. And speaking of more, today we see more and more different parties taking to social media and using influencers and this type of thing. So that leads me to my next question, which is charisma and social media presence enough to be a good leader? Or does leadership require more than just being relatable to the youth? Or, yeah, man, I's a man of the ground. I grounded. Yeah. What's needed?
Much more than that. Because charisma gets a few captured. Being on the ground gets a few captured. I mean, you see somebody, let's look at Mikhael Campbell. When she speaks, you are moved. Look at her dad. I think he's professional before he was in theater. You know how to sell a crowd. You know how to convince and move persons from left to right. But then, when you look at our social media climate, when you have persons that, I think somebody mentioned before, if they were to be an ambassador, the reaction would have been, However, more and more, I think the persons on social media have a responsibility, especially if you have a following. Because you have to live with the decision that you make with your followers in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and I think we're not taking that seriously. Social media is a place where you will capture persons you will sway them. Because we live there. I mean, if I was on this panel, I'm on my phone looking to see what's the next trending thing.
Right now.
Right now. But I believe, though, that must not be enough, but some persons get away with it. Because we know how much we could do with AI. We know how much we could do with editing a clip to make you look as if you are better than the queen or the king himself. You are there, you are rubbing your clean foot. You're better than Jesus in some instances when they edited the clip. But there is more to it, and I think that social media is only an aspect that we should be cognizant of and go beyond. So I go back to my point earlier. Research and look at someone's character. The panel mentioned, look at them at Palview, where how they show up to the debate. What are their contributions, direction? Is much more than that, but we have to be vigilant because they're doing a real good job out there making you believe that they have the best interest at heart for Trinidad and Tobago.
I would just jump in to say that, to me personally, substance is worth more than form. So you could have the best public persona online. That does not tell me that you are going to seek my best interest or my community's best interest, or that you even have an understanding of what it means to be a parliamentarian, because we are electing people to occupy seats in parliament for 5 years, to make decisions for 5 years, to influence law, to influence policy, to determine the price of bread for the next 5 years. So you could come on social media and put out the best ad, and that might appeal to some people, yes. But at the end of the day, that doesn't translate into you are the best person for the job. You know, there's a saying, empty vessels make the most noise. I think that also applies in the current climate. We live in an age where social media has created so much opportunities for misinformation, disinformation, manipulated media, and those things potentially can sway an electorate. And then if you vote based on that, you might find yourself in a situation where you put somebody in power for 5 years and they can't even stand up and talk to represent your interests.
Everybody wants to share. Go ahead.
I was listening to our podcast recently, and we've lived through several revolutions, right? So we lived through the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, and right now we're in the digital revolution, that age of where digitization is taking off, communities are moving there, everything is moving onto that specific platform. And what is happening is that we're seeing a new world emerging, but we haven't caught up as yet with the policy making, with the understanding of what this world is. Even the politicians themselves who are utilizing this same technology to push their agendas for the political campaigns don't even understand where we're at and where the AI revolution is taking place. They said, if you look as well and you trace the history of how politics has taken place and the forms that they've used, the media forms. So at one point in time, radio was the biggest thing, right? And then after that came TV, television. And these same exact conversations were being had when those things came up. In 2008, when Obama won the elections, it was around social media and how social media is the new platform that's changing things. This new generation that we enter into is data analytics, right? That's where we enter into. People are utilizing that to change the world and change the way in which things are perceived. And therefore, you have all these social influencers who are utilizing this, but there are not enough sensitization campaigns around how to recognize what is right, what is wrong, and where we're supposed to be going in terms of the future of the digital age.
Interesting perspective. Kemuel.
social media and being on the ground just adds a certain level of it, level to it rather. But there are politicians right here in this country who do very, very good work behind the scenes. Ministers, they do excellent work behind the scenes, but they may not necessarily be that person that is out there that you see all the time. They're always on the media or they're always appearing in front of an interview. For instance, I could single out a minister in the Ministry of the Office of the Prime Minister, Minister Yana Webster-Roy. She does great work in her ministry, but because she isn't the most vocal person, people don't know that, you know?
Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's the exciting time where we open the floor to our live audience for questions and comments. All are welcome. And I see we have our first comment right in to my left, maybe to your right. Yes.
Thank you, Tim. I just wanted to add to what Mr. Campbell was saying. He was speaking to all the wonderful initiatives that were coming out of the Ministry of Youth with the youth-focused training programs and so on. And I would say that a lot of that would have stemmed from the National Youth Policy and it would have aligned with the goals in that policy. So in electing our next government as youth, we have to be informed as to the policies that they are proposing and whether they would make sense as to how it would impact us now, not just in the present, in the future, sorry, but now in the present. Thank you.
All right, and they say real men wear pink, and I would like to hear from the gentleman over there in the pink shirt. Yes, he has a question or comment.
So I have a question, Tim. Now, I am in media, right? And I think that social media has this thing where you can control what people think. Do you believe that, it might be funny that I ask this, that politicians should have the ability to promote what they do on social media? Because I can make it seem that I look real good on social media, but the ground does not see you at all, because they could paint a picture for those who believe who is going to vote, right? Hey, vote for me, I can do this and do that and do that, but in reality, they don't. What do you think that social media should have a great influence on the election? Or
Great question. Let me put it to the panel. Khaleem.
Sure. So I think the problem with social media is that because it's a largely unregulated or under-regulated environment, it creates conditions for media manipulation and for persons to control the narrative, sell the best version of themselves, whatever the case may be. And then two things are very important in that. One, anybody who's consuming something on social media needs to always remember that they must firstly be a fact checker. You must firstly listen to what you're being told and then engage in some independent research. A simple Google search could sometimes show you how what you're being told is absolute misinformation, right? And then the second thing is, I think that also opens up a wider conversation on the need for perhaps regulating the use of social media within the context of elections. So perhaps this is where we need to see the Election and Boundaries Commission coming in and proposing some sort of legislative amendment through whatever ministry they fall under, so that when the next parliament meets, we have some sort of legislation being introduced to, one, control politicians' use of social media to ensure that it is responsible, that it is ethical, that there are systems and processes of accountability, so that we don't continue to have a cycle of misinformation, but we have a cycle of information that we could rely on. Of course, that is an ideal world, and it begs the question as to, do we live in an ideal world?
To answer that question, not just regulations. I remember when I just started studying journalism, we are taught this thing about media literacy. And that's very important because the average person just goes on social media and they may not be paying attention or looking at things from the lens that we fellow panelists or you in the audience may be looking at it from. And so maybe if we can start speaking about those things in school, stuff like media literacy, you are taught that not everything that you see on social media is what it is. There are things that are there behind it. That's just a face that they're putting up, a front that they're putting up, basically. And so we can start right there, media literacy in schools, especially at the secondary school level.
And to add the question, in terms of, he asks, like, if it plays a major role in elections. Do you remember the time that If they don't see it, they don't believe it. And I think it was mentioned in the discussion that there are really good politicians and ministers who are doing the work, but you just don't see. And the people would say, what you do for us, you doing nothing. I can't put a finger to what you have been doing so far because many of us live our life on the media. So I agree with Ali's point in terms of you must regulate social media because you could lead the population down a slippery slope and then be crying afterwards. But at the same time, those ministers, those politicians are left with the media to promote what they have been doing because that's where their track record, I guess, that's where the track record is because people would see you paved the road, I didn't see the road paved. You give somebody something, I didn't see it, it never happened. And we leave that up to chance to say, well, because we live oblivious at times, we see the pothole, when the pothole is paved, we're driving good. And the moment the pothole comes back, what a pothole doing here still? So if we don't highlight it, but we have to be responsible, as Ali mentioned, in terms of you putting your content out there, they have a responsibility to put the truth, and we have a responsibility to fact check.
I just wanted to add one quick point, because mainstream media has such a big role to play, but I mean, the converse is people need to learn to read as well. Because when a newspaper decides to publish with a title that says Dragon Deal Dead, and everybody say, what going on with Stuart Young? How he gonna do that? How he gonna make we... Not understanding the geopolitics behind that particular issue and what would have led to it. And in many instances, I have seen the media just, of course, it's media, they have to sell. So their caption can be so misleading. And because people don't read and they don't fact check, people run with everything that they see. And that
round of applause are welcome. There you guys can, yes. Round of applause are welcome.
You know, that's a huge issue. And as Khaleem said, you know, we don't really have people who do fact checking. And so what you tend to see is that people are not able to properly analyze what politicians are doing because you're just running with a title, not understanding that, listen, things could happen outside of their control, but how they manage the situation going forward is what is important.
Darrion, you're looking at me.
I'll weigh in here. I think I have a little bit of opposing view to the panelists, actually.
That's why I wanted to call on you.
I am actually more in support of decentralization, away from the big media moguls. So back in the days, it would be the newspapers who would control what you think, how you thought. Then it went to television and radio, etc. And then the people who put on there were influenced and paid to say certain things or to act in certain ways. And what we're actually seeing now is that you have laymen speaking up on the social media platforms, and there's a level of decentralization taking place, which I actually kind of appreciate. I like that. I think what is happening is then how does not necessarily the EBC regulate this, right? But rather, how do they negotiate with some of the social media partners to probably put like little captions at the bottom? I don't know how many of you all on X, well, Twitter, formerly Twitter, but you would see like if something is AI generated, this post was AI generated. This is not true. This is something that was exaggerated, and there are little captions. So you're allowed to still put out the media, but there's a caption below that fact checks automatically for you. Maybe that's a way that we can move forward in terms of the EBC, but I'm not one for particularly regulating, oh, you put that out there, don't put that out there, you're not allowed to say this, or telling people, no, you can't say that. Even, and this is going to be controversial, even if it's true or not, because I think the freedom of speech is important, and I think the decentralization is important. So maybe just that little caveat of this is AI generated might be something that's beneficial there.
But
Kemuel.
just very quickly, but to an extent, there are almost regulations from the parliamentary perspective. And Khaleem would know, and those of you who view Parliament would know, there are times when former MPs have posted stuff on social media during the sitting of the Parliament, and the Speaker has addressed it because it has been brought to our attention. So to an extent, there are regulations that kind of governs what, well, parliamentarians, for instance, can post on social media, especially during sittings of the House.
I'm just asking about clarity here, right? I'm asking for clarity, but that's specifically within the realm of Parliament. Yeah, what I'm talking about here is elections, at elections time, etc., all of that, yeah.
I just want to add one point in relation to what Darrion said, because what we are in now is influencer culture. And what we have been seeing over the past few weeks is the use of influencers to promote particular political narratives.
I hear the audience saying,
There is significant danger in that. But again, I mean, it has to be balanced because as a citizen, I am responsible for fact checking. But when you choose influencers that don't necessarily align with a brand of country development, somebody who's involved in volunteering, somebody who's involved in civic engagement, you just choose the random Joe on the street to promote a particular political party, and that person has a very large following. Where are we finding ourselves? Because while engaging with influencers might be, a pro or a good thing for a political party, you are possibly misleading a very large section of the population to vote on bases that they have not necessarily gone to do reading or research or anything on. So while I do appreciate, that coming away from mainstream media to an extent, it's very dangerous engaging with some of these influencers, and those are just things that we have to consider in looking at the political campaigns and making decisions that we think we want to go do on April the 28th.
You know how to come back in here.
of course, of course. Go ahead.
I have a question for you, René, then, right, with what you just said. So where are those social media influencers who are more well-read, who are a bit more informed, and why, if they're influencers already, why are they not critiquing those influencers who are putting out misinformation? What is happening there? So people are going quiet on the social media platforms as well. And is it fair? So then if there's a fear factor inside there, should we not speak out? But where are they? Where are they is my question. Because I'm not seeing them. I don't see any social media influencers. And depending on how we define influencers as well, because that's something that will also be important to the discussion.
Yes, but to continue the discussion, and in Trinidad and Tobago audience, sometimes negativity goes a lot further than positivity. So, yes, we love our bacchanal and our sauce, and according to the words of young brother, steamy, yes. But do you think that could be one of the reasons why you don't see the ones who are more in a positive light, because the good is often being shadowed by the negative?
Yeah, you see it in even how we sell our newspapers. The front page will actually have how much persons have been recorded dead for the year as opposed to how much persons are doing good within the year. That don't sell. As a matter of fact, I myself do debunking of some myths and misinformation. And if you check the comment section, I can tell you without fear of contradiction, I've received their threats and I've received all sorts of vile hatred for the fact of me trying to inform the population that what is being said to you there, it is not truth. And if those influencers, Darrion, don't want to go out there to face that type of music, because the music isn't nice, I can't fault them for that, because it requires you to have a different sort of courage. Because I can tell you this, once I do videos and it goes viral, whatever the case may be, the comment, some person will say, thank you, I did not know, but 95% is of hate. Right? They want to send you to the ground. Like they want to bury you before it even reach. But the ones that are promoting Bacchanal and its team, and it goes so far and wide that you hear it in the rum shop, you hear it in the maxi, you hear it in the taxis, you hear it all over the place. So we who are fighters for the truth always start off with zero, because you start off pushing positivity. Tell me something. I'm sure there's much young people who are doing great within the land, but you could only single out a handful. But you could tell persons who's raw talk, who's Matara, who's this one, who's that one, because why? They have chosen the route of Bacchanal, and Bacchanal, as Kemuel just told me there, it sells and it sells and it sells. And that's the reality. So I hope persons could join us in the fight of saying that is not true and ignore those within our population who's coming to say, hey, the color of your skin, the color of your hair, hey, we go kill you. Yeah?
I like that. Some youth claim there are no real opportunities for financial growth or support, but with the number of government grants, businesses, development programs, and entrepreneurship training available, is it that the resources are lacking or that youth aren't using them? My panel. Yes, Reneé has a smile on her face. Love that smile. Tell me.
That's a complex question because, to be quite fair, looking at the work of the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, as well as the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, there have been a lot of programs for young people, from technical vocational skills to mentorship to apprenticeship programs. The reality is that they would not be able to accommodate everyone in the programs. I do think, though, that accessibility may be an issue, because the reality is when a government opens up a program, there will be different socioeconomic factors that might affect one person who may not be able to participate in the program. Maybe they live far, they don't have money to travel to the sessions, they don't have access to internet. So accessibility can be a huge issue when it comes to being able to benefit from opportunities. However, what we also need to consider is a lazy culture among some young people, and I have to highlight that because in Trinidad and Tobago, we are in a society where we have a kind of gimme culture. People want fast money, they want it now. I want a job where I could just go and sign in the morning and that's it for me for the rest of the day.
I'm living in the hospital, I want a house.
You understand what I'm saying? So the reality is that we need young people who are motivated to not only depend on government opportunities, but also create opportunities for themselves. However, there must be an ecosystem that facilitates entrepreneurship a bit further, and I'd leave the rest for my panelists to contribute.
Smiling, tell me.
I agree with Reneé wholeheartedly on all the points that she's made. I think, generally in Trinidad and Tobago amongst young people, there's this culture, and that culture is heavily influenced by American media, influencer culture, and these get-rich-quick paths. And so we've gotten to a place of everybody wants money, but are you willing to put in the work and make the sacrifices to get the money? That's one aspect of the narrative. The other aspect of the narrative is you could have how much grants, you could have how many programs, you could have the world of things available. But one, if these things aren't publicized in a way where you are going into communities and reaching out to people and not just posting things on social media, because the last time I checked, and I open to being fact-checked, please, Trinidad and Tobago has an internet penetration rate of 70-something%, right? About 77%, if I remember correctly. And so you have 23% of people who don't have access to internet, right? So that's a group of people already being discounted. Then when you deal, right, so digital poverty, as Darrion just said. And then you have people who live in communities where they ain't getting up to leave Port of Spain to come because, everything had been tongue, right? And so we've seen the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service going into communities, and I will always give credit where credit is due. But other ministries, one, need to adopt that approach. Meet young people where they are. Don't expect young people to meet you, right? And then the second problem is, and that ties into the point of access versus equitable access. If we are not equitable in these programs and we don't put provisions in place to help the most people or the most deserving people access these programs, then they're going to end up with what we see happening all the time, the same young people in the room doing the thing, right? And so only certain people have access to these things now.
Yes. Kemuel?
Yes. Accessibility is a major factor in it, but I also think that young people, I'd like to add that young people are lacking inspiration in some instances. And so, yes, the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service does go out with their caravans and stuff, and I commend them for that. But sometimes young people want even more than that. They just want to be inspired to go out there. They just want, to be further mentored to actually go there and access those programs. And so inspiration or lack of inspiration is a big factor in that and something that we often discount.
So let me chime in a bit. Earlier in the conversation, we spoke about young people, we have a lazy culture. And we live in a society where we want the government to do every single thing for you. And that's a reality. So they spoke about the youth caravan going into the communities to meet persons where they're at. You also have Ministry of Works and Transport where their mobile licensing offices going into the community. So you are seeing the progress being made bit by bit where that is concerned. As a matter of fact, when we go into the communities, let's just say this is our ministry, we go into the communities. We cannot force the young persons to come and be a part of the programs. It requires them also to make a first step And as my colleague mentioned, they want inspiration and motivation. Where is the community? Where is the family base to assist them in pushing themselves to go forward? Because when you go to those persons, some of them, they may not have any ID cards, they don't have the birth paper, and we sit down and we say, well, the government didn't do nothing for me. But what are you doing? And what are your parents doing? What your friend to encourage you to be there? And an example, we are saying where finance is concerned, we do not recognize that there are young persons, we spoke about those who are not employed, but the ones who are employed who are working for $7,000 for the month and less, right? What would have happened with the Ministry of Finance? There are over 300,000 persons in this country who receive payment as salaries with it not being taxed. If you look at it during COVID-19, we looked at persons who were not employed because they lost their jobs, and the government was able to supply them with at least 3 months supply to get you by because nobody had a blueprint how to fight COVID-19. Even the entertainers like yourself and those who artists would have been given some grant to assist them to get them from point A to point B. So looking at the Ministry of Finance and what they are doing, it is behind the scenes. But as well, when it comes to finance, we never shy away because it is so complex. And that is where the educated have to meet those who are not as educated to bridge the gap, to help them get there. Because could anyone explain to me what is the tax on the green fund? Like, as a young person, like, what, green fund? What is that? So we may be privileged enough to sit down behind a computer and say, well, this is what it is, but are we going out to hold somebody by the hand and say, let me help you, let me help you? Because there's so much more. I don't want to hog the mic, but there's a lot that the Ministry of Finance are doing, and especially, and it trickles down. A good example again. As a matter of fact, I rest. Go ahead.
We'll come back to that. We have a question from the audience, from right up in front.
So to the panelists, I see that we're having a conversation that is directed around youth and, the development of youth, because youth right now is the center of this voting strategy. A lot of them are the main targets, the main audience. So my question kind of revolves around that. Do you think that the government now, or the government in the future, or any authority really, should now redirect any kind of profits that the country itself is making, whether it be from oil and gas or any other industry, towards youth-led initiatives, whether it be tech startups, whether it be any kind of small, young-led businesses?
I like the question. It's a good one. But I would ask a question to the audience, including yourself. How many other countries do you know within the world that you pay young people to learn? To give them a stipend to learn MIC, YTEP, CCC. Where MIC? And he coaching me, NESC. Where else in the world would you being paid to go to learn a skill, and you could use those same skills to come and build my house? It is something like befundled by it, because here what happens. The oil and gas, that pays our bills in our country. And I would always say diversification is necessary. It has to happen, but we've seen this a long time, but it is the truth. However, we have more could be done, but I'm saying I don't think we are capitalizing enough on those initiatives, because you could come out there as a tradesperson and how much a plumber makes, how much a tire person makes, and those you're being paid to go there and acquire the skill. You're being paid you're given land to go and do agriculture, to be a farmer, to feed the country. What else again could we want from government to do? Improve the program, yes, but sorry, my rest.
I think in answering that question, we have to start with the fact that we have a lot of those things in place already. Government has invested in free education from the ECCE level all up to tertiary level. It's a surprise to many Trinidadians and to even people in other Caribbean islands that people when you talk to people from other Caribbean islands and they find out the government here paying for us to do CXC, they're shocked. Where are they getting money from that? Some countries in the Caribbean now starting to introduce these things. And so as a population, as young people, we have a lot of privilege. Government pays for a lot of things for us. The problem with it is that when government pays for things and it worked the first time, they will keep paying for it and they will not revisit it or revise it or modernize it. And so what we have is a culture of budgeting based on this concept of recurrent expenditure. We keep paying for the same thing over and over because it's working. Until it falls all the way down to the ground, we're going to keep paying for it. So let me give you a practical example in terms of how it should be, in my opinion. We have GATE, right? So GATE, everybody, now, well, we've revised it. We have a means test. Okay, great. We're saving money in terms of ensuring that only those who need support get support. Everybody's still getting support, but those who need more support get more support. Great. But then we still faced with the problem of everybody graduating as a doctor, everybody graduating as a lawyer, engineer, or whatever. And so we have unemployment and we have underemployment. How do we revise that? We have a system in place to help young people. The answer is simple. Program viability audits. If you as a government could sit and say, okay, we have too many lawyers, we have too many doctors, we have too many engineers, the world is heading in this direction. We need people in AI, we need people in this, we need people in that. Let's revise GATE. GATE is now going to fund these specific programs. You want free education, these are the things that you need to specialize in. And so taxpayers' money then fund things that have a return on the country, that make an investment in young people, and that ensure that Trinidad and Tobago is able to advance and keep up with the ever-evolving world that we live in. Particularly right now, I think everybody on the panel will agree that geopolitically we are in a space where everything is changing. Yes. And the reality for us is we either take advantage of it or we be taken advantage of, right? And so unless we have elected officials who understand that we could keep the program, but maybe we need to retailor the program ever so often, and we need to keep asking, what can we do to improve? What can we do to capitalize and get the best out of our investment in a way that supports young people, that supports Trinidad and Tobago, and still shows that we care?
And that's why it's important that our developmental goals as a country are aligned to the programs that we offer, which is the point that Khaleem was making. And very often you see people going, as Khaleem said, everyone goes to be a doctor, everyone goes to be a lawyer. But in the long run, how does that benefit the country in terms of development going forward? And so he mentioned the culture of recurrent expenditure. We're just paying people to work in a ministry, paying people to do this, paying people to do that. But are we looking at moving people from step 1 to step 2 to step 3? That's where we need to be. That's where we need to not just be able to motivate them, not just be able to mobilize them, but be able to actually take them somewhere.
Now, we have another question from the audience, but before we go there, just a quick point I would like to add. Now, yes, to agree with the panel and to also pose a question. Now, in English, they tell us you must never answer a question with a question, but I will break the rule here. And the question I want to ask is, how does a government do that? Because, yes, where one might agree that you should bespoke the different programs to be able to appeal to the different students at the different times of their learning and whatnot and so forth. But imagine a government now comes out and says, hey, this is no longer free. Hey, this is where here, this is there now. How does one do that, which I think is necessary, but still do not lose the favor of the young people that it is intended for?
Well, those decisions cannot be unilateral. Those decisions have to be based on data, and that data has to come from consultation. And that consultation is not a panel in government campus in Port of Spain where you're asking people to come to you. You need to go the same way you could reach any constituency when you want the vote is the same way you could reach any constituency to talk to the people about what you're going to do. So that's where it starts. When we talk about, for example, programs, right? We're talking about programs and funding all of our national infrastructure and all of our initiatives. The way that we budget is archaic. We budget from a place of technocrats sitting in a locked room, and they come from certain backgrounds, and they decide what they think is best for the average person on the ground, as opposed to going and meeting the person on the ground and saying, and like Reneé said earlier, when you hear things politicians say on platforms, you could tell how detached they are from reality. When they talk about the price of a dinner mint, I don't know if you all remember that, or being 25 cents or 50 cents, and people here like, oh no, it's almost $1 now, people paying for this. What is the disconnect? And the disconnect is decisions being made unilaterally. Nobody is saying you can't cut a program, but what is the perception? I am going to cut this program, deal with it. we need to cut this program. We need to talk about it. We need to figure out how we go from here to here, and I need to have that conversation with you so that when that program is cut, at least you understand why we had to cut it and where that money went and how it benefits you. So, like I said, the same way you could find yourself in my constituency to get my vote every 5 years is the same way you could find yourself in the constituency every day, because governance is a 5-year job. It's not a one-day thing or a one-season thing.
So,
Great.
you know what a smile mean, right?
Yeah. When you start to smile, I get worried. But go ahead.
I'm 50-50 with the panel here. I want to agree with Khaleem's point and that point that was made between data-driven decision-making. I think that's essential and very important, because in the absence of data-driven decision-making, what is happening is that people are developing programs and policies that are not really impacting everyone and not reaching the most vulnerable populations. Where I wanted to actually come in with a little bit of dissent is actually around who is the oil money for? So the money that the country earns, it has to go back to the people. Yeah, so I am not for government officials sitting in a high office and then passing it amongst with just their friends in the same place and space, right? It has to go down and it has to trickle down to the people. And the majority of expenditure should be on the people or things that directly relate to and benefit the people. That is, if you watch any other oil-producing nation across the entire globe, the UAE, UAE does the same exact things that we do here. What they have mastered is diversification. So they've moved, if you are a UAE citizen, you get free education straight up, and then you get a certain percentage. They pay you something every single month, yeah, inside that particular country. So you have things, if you watch other oil-producing nations, the money that's earned from the oil is then goes back to the people. And that's very essential. What we need to move towards is, of course, higher diversification. But that being said, I also want to say that not everybody has to be an entrepreneur. I think that there's this mindset that, okay, the best way to give back to people is for everybody to become an entrepreneur, so let's just train everybody to be an entrepreneur. I think you're actually setting up a lot of people for failure, because entrepreneurship is not only the gaining of that particular skill, and again, this comes back to your point, Khaleem, and I think Reneé was making this point as well, of data-driven decision-making, because when you analyze, are we analyzing and seeing, all right, a year after this program is implemented, I could come out here, and if I have a budget of 20,000 TT, let's say, I can make it seem like if I did 15 programs, yeah? And if you've been involved in any youth space in Trinidad and Tobago, you know that $20,000 could give you 15 programs. But are we measuring the impact of those programs going forward? What would, statistically, a year later, what has happened with that specific program? What has happened with people who have been involved in that program? And that's really where we need to get to.
We have another question right here. Let's hear it.
Good day, everyone. So you all are persons, youths who have the opportunity to represent the youths and your country globally. So my question is, how do you see the role of international funding and development partnerships in building youth entrepreneurship in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as what safeguards do you think should be in place to ensure final inclusion doesn't turn into financial exploitation?
Could you repeat the last part of the question?
What safeguards do you think should be in place to ensure financial inclusion doesn't turn into financial exploitation?
All right, and hand is up.
Okay, so to answer this very complicated question, the first thing is I want to ask actually the room a question. If you are familiar with the United Nations Summit of the Future, raise your hand. Right. So, as expected, not many hands went up. So last year, the UN would have convened to have something called the Summit of the Future, which is really about positioning the United Nations and its member states to move beyond 2030, because the clock is quickly expiring on the SDGs and the 2020 goals, right? And coming out of that, that Summit of the Future was something called a Pact for the Future, and in that Pact for the Future, member states committed themselves to the most comprehensive set of declarations to support young people and to promote youth inclusion into all spheres of governance, right? That is something that most people in Trinidad and Tobago do not know about, right? But this is where the world is heading. A part of that specific Pact for the Future is a recognizing of the need to reform international financial architecture, right? And that is just the big fancy way of revisiting the way in which global financial systems are managed and how they can support or promote youth work, right? Definitely, international organizations play a very critical role in funding youth projects in Trinidad and Tobago. And partnerships with those organizations are, of course, important. I mean, many of my panelists here have worked in civil society organizations and spaces, and they know how reliant a lot of civil society organizations are on international funding, right? So one, definitely something that is important for us. What is also important for us is understanding that those partnerships are no longer secure and those partnerships are no longer guaranteed to us. We would have seen recent changes to USAID, which was one of the biggest financiers for young people and programs that work to support young people being frozen, right? And that had global ramifications, even for Trinidad and Tobago and civil society organizations here and national programs run by the government. So whilst, yes, international partnerships are very important to, specifically for development, one, we need to recognize that those systems are no longer sustainable. Two, they need to be reformed because there's no equity in how monies are managed. But then on the flip side of it, young people also need to take some initiative and go and seek out those systems, those partnerships that are available. So, for example, I'm sure many people in the room would, or people tuning in, the European Union recently launched a new fund that is meant to empower young people. This fund is one of those funds where you don't need to have any sort of criteria to be considered. You don't need to be incorporated. You don't need to be an NGO. You could be a young person with a vision and a young person with a plan. Once you follow the simple guidelines and apply, you could get funding from the EU. This is one example of things that are available to young people, right? In terms of a culture of accountability and not exploitation, that really falls to the remit of the people who sit in our parliament, the people that we vote for. They have to create laws and put laws in place, or not everything has to be a law, create policies that can regulate and create an enabling environment where young people are supported by these international organizations and not exploited, and supported by even local organizations and not exploited by local organizations. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Now, moving on, our social media team spoke to a few young voters. Now, let's hear what their thoughts are on the importance of voting. We have another question from the audience. Sir?
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to commend the panelists on the discussion that we're having. And my question goes back to contributions by Khaleem and Kemuel. So Khaleem would have mentioned that when we making decisions further, or when the government is making decisions further, they should have discussions or explain to the citizens why they are making those decisions. But do you think that the citizens will actually accept the data that they're given? Because an example is when the government closed Petrotrin, right? They gave data, they showed that it wasn't profiting the country, but citizens still wasn't happy with the decision.
Okay, so to answer your question specifically from that perspective of Petrotrin, it is important to look at how that information is relayed to citizens. You don't go on a podium and announce to people that I have made this decision because of ABC. You start by meeting people where they are at and have conversations with them in smaller spaces about and hear their concerns. Most people just want to be heard, and they want a conduit by which they could express how they feel about decisions, and that is what representative government is supposed to be about. And so I think it is important, as Darrion mentioned earlier, something that is very important is intergenerational dialogue, right? Because as he mentioned, we tend to deal with these issues in silos. We tend to talk about, one, we make a decision nationally and announce it, and then we look at how that decision, as it falls out, might affect youth, affect women, affect this group, affect that group, affect this program, as opposed to engaging in intergenerational dialogue. And just for some knowledge, that's about bringing people together from different generations to discuss problems and how it affects them from a generational perspective and working together to recognize commonality, right? And so getting people to unite behind a common goal or a common objective. it would be much more efficient, in my opinion, for elected representatives, as Reneé mentioned, to one, utilize their councillors, because they have councillors through local government, and have town halls where if you know central government is going to make a decision, have some consultation with the people and have the information that your local councillor gets from you, that your MP gets from you, feed that into what the actual rollout of that decision is going to be. Don't just come on our platform and announce, I've made a decision because I think this is in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago. At least from that perspective, you could say, I have engaged in consultation. This is the decision that we've had to come to. This is how it's going to affect you. We recognize that the concerns that you have are A, B, C, D, E, and this is how we plan to address those concerns. That is more meaningful, that is more representative than simply having a government that listens to people who say what they want to hear them say and act based on that.
Correct. Lovely question. What I think it is, it's not what you do, but it's how you do it. And so communication is key in that. And so having studied journalism and communication, I know that the reason why the government policies are sometimes not accepted in the way in which they intend for it to be accepted is because of the fact that they don't communicate with the population properly. And so let's start right there. How you communicate your policies are key to how the population accepts your policies.
Questions flowing, answers flowing. Now I'm going and switch over to health and wellness. Now, we ought to discuss the well-being of our youth. And the question here is, the government has introduced wellness campaigns and mental health initiatives targeting youth. Are these efforts being ignored by young people, or are they simply not reaching the right audiences? My panel. Yes, I'm singling you out.
So actually, this is my area of expertise. I work specifically in trauma-informed environments with children. I think what's happening is that we're seeing, so for example, I went to a school, I'll share a little story here, and I did a drama session with the intention of trauma-informed case, so a trauma-informed drama intervention, yeah? Just to explore the traumas that children were going through and what they were experiencing. And this was in a community in or some schools by Bessor Street there. Yeah, and I did the intervention there. And in those discussions, several things came up with the children. So I'm talking about a focus group there. You have a certain amount of children there, and we're interacting, and we're having those conversations. And one of the things I was exploring was suicidality amongst teens and self-harm, amongst children, sorry. And 40% of my participants had self-harmed. 40%. And that's the reality of the mental health crisis that we have right now within the country. Now, is there an absence of policies around mental health in Trinidad and Tobago? Personally, I think that there are actually really good resources that you can access. Yeah, that's one of the areas where I've seen a lot of good work. Now, one of the issues that I have is that we don't have the human resource to fill out those areas of mental health. So you have all these policies, all these nice things that look really good on paper. And then when you go into schools, for example, you have a lack of counselors. You have one guidance counselor sometimes for 4 different areas or 4 schools. Yeah? That is something in and of itself that's not sustainable in the long run. So if I'm looking at that perspective of mental health, it might not be that we have an absence of policy. What it might be is that we have an absence of the resources allocated to that specific area to enact policy.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, my panel. With access to free tertiary education through GATE, expanded school nutrition, and school upgrades, are youth really being failed by the system, or is it time for students to take more responsibility for their own success? Everybody looks at Darrion, yes.
I think I'll jump in here. So actually, just to give you a little bit of a caveat, I am a former guild president at UWI St. Augustine as well.
Right.
And from there, I had the chance to interact with several different organizations, talking from working in the primary to the secondary to the tertiary level of education. And it was really interesting because along that journey, what you see is that there are parts of the system that is working, and then there are parts that is not working. I think one of the things that I've oftentimes told, or when asked questions like this, spoken to people about, is looking at what is working and then trying to apply that across the board. So for example, I'm not so much concerned with those schools that are partly owned by religious institutions and then partly owned by government, because those schools are what we'll call, in inverted commas, prestige schools, right? What I'm concerned about are the government schools that are getting just as many scholarships as those prestige schools. So, for example, I know that there's excellence in, like, for example, Kuvasek. There's like a lot of great things happening there. So what is different about that school compared to other government schools? And taking a cross-examination of that, what can be taken as best practice from that school and then applying it there? And I think that's where really a whole idea of data-driven research is so essential, because we could see we have things that are working in the country already. We just need to learn how to then take the best practices from there and have the application across the entire country.
Kemuel.
Yes. On that point well, I'll answer the question, but I'll also mention the data point. That's why the National Statistical Institute bill that's been before Joint Select Committee in Parliament for the last couple of years, that we can't seem to get past the bill itself. But what I would say is that sometimes we need to take responsibility as youth for where we need to be. And so oftentimes it's not always the system to be blamed. Sometimes we need to understand that this is the system that we work with, and we work in, and we just have to find a way to move past that. Because if every one of us were to say, this is the system and this is just the way it is, then nobody will get forward. Nobody will be able to move forward.
And let me highlight the fact that there was a video from someone from St. Lucia speaking about how privileged we are as people in Trinidad and Tobago to have the ability to have the government pay for each subject we do. Because across there and other islands, each subject that you want to do, you have to pay for it for yourself. And there was a point in time where you could have repeat the exam 3 times without paying, and the government would pay that for you. And now we fast forward to this dispensation where there is a means test that was mentioned before by Ali. But let's go back a bit. When GATE was there for all of us, you started at a degree, you say you want to do it, you jump to the next one, and the government had to pay full cost for it. So even if you fail, they pay and you go in again, and that's where we came from. So, and the responsibility of a student is to sit down and do the work. I know for a fact that sometimes, especially UE, the registration and the administration, they give you hell sometimes. And I mean, to give Jack the jacket, you work on it and you will improve, but there's always room for improvement. But I want to put the buck on us, because when I sit down in a classroom, I have to put my head down and get the job done. That's my main goal, nothing else. And there's a point in time where we would have just jumped to medicine, jumped to theater, jumped to law, and jumped to everything else, and then the government just spending. And then we would say, now, we pay the price for that now, you know. Because the means test is now saying, we don't have the sum of money to splash it as we did before. And therefore, we have to do the prudent thing to manage, which should have been done before, but manage what we have. So if you could afford to pay for your education, pay for it so I could direct that money to someone who cannot pay for it. I really believe that we take in more responsibility and do what we have to do, and at the same time, I always use in this statement, work and sugar at the same time, advocate for better. What about can we highlight the disabled, the environment we create for the disabled learners who, when they go to school, the ramps for them? Like, could we highlight what is happening in different schools? Do we know about it? Again, publication, the social media, are we seeing it? Do we know? Can we have someone in the audience say, well, my brother goes to autistic school and he doesn't have to pay for that? I think, Dr. Darrion, I could call him Doc on this panel here because he speaks so well. But these are the things that we should actually be, yes, highlighting what's working well, but at the same time, I come from a household, you have to do the work. So you can come out come out as bright as Ali and Reneé and them and Pascall on the panel here.
Now, before we reach to the gate, right, and a question that I would like to pose to the panel and to the audience as well, is do you think there is a lot of work to be done before you get to the gate, somewhere along the fence that leads to the gate, so that you build up the expectation of the student before they even reach to the choice? Because I will give you a story. I remember coming out of school and I had no idea what I wanted to do next. I did not know. And I went to Queen's Royal College. And even though I went to a quote-unquote prestigious school where I was beautifully educated in all the arts and history, science, this, that, the other, but I ended up an announcer on radio and someone in entertainment. But at my time in school there, other than my music teacher, big up Mr. Raja, there was nobody there to guide me in that direction. So do you think some more work has to be done along the fence that leads up to gate?
I think that definitely is a conversation that needs to be had on a national level. The path to that gate definitely has some potholes in it, for lack of a better phrase. And it needs to be reworked. It needs to be reimagined because we have a culture of underemployment and a culture of unemployment in Trinidad and Tobago. I know so many people who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are engineers, who have gone to university and they've done their part, but they can't get a job. Or they have a degree and they know they don't want to use it because that's what they've realized. This isn't what I wanted to do. And I feel like in our education system, it's a straight path. There's no room for curvature and deviation, for people to explore, for people to create, to try different things, to figure out what they actually want to do, as opposed to go to school, get a degree, get a job. Full stop. That's the path, right? And so I think even there's a disconnect when you get to the precursor to that gate, where you have so many university programs being offered, yet at the CAPE level or the pre-university level, you have very specific subjects. So what kind of preparatory work are young people being exposed to get into the gate, right? And then the other problem is that even behind the gate, where the universities themselves are, we continue to offer programs that I call them tried and tested programs. The same programs have been working, so we're keeping them there. But when you look at what is happening globally, and you look at where the job market is going, I mean, there was I think I saw on LinkedIn a few days ago about the 15 essential skills that the future requires. And a lawyer was ranked, I could talk about law, a lawyer was ranked like pretty low down in the list. All of the jobs before were about technology, digital transformation, artificial intelligence. And people think, there's this thing I learned about recently called prompt engineering in artificial intelligence, which is literally an entire job where you just get paid to create prompts for AI. So, and these are the things that the world is moving towards. The world is in a technological revolution, and we are not there yet. And we are not there yet because the path and that which is behind the gate continues to take the tried and tested straight path. And it does not allow young people to, deviate, explore, figure out what they want to do in a way that is, meaningful, in a way that young people could actually feel like, okay, there's a viable option for me, or I don't have to be a doctor, I don't have to be a lawyer, I don't have to be an engineer.
Now, we're talking about education, and sometimes without a proper education, that can lead many young people down the wrong avenue that heads directly into crime. Now, crime remains a concern, but with recent youth-focused community patrols, mentorship programs, and security investments, is enough being done to steer young people away from violence, or are we still ignoring the root causes?
I think that's a trick question because more could always be done now. Like you will never reach that state of perfection, but you could measure how it was last year compared to this year. And I would talk about young people in terms of crime and violence. Like we have to recognize that that's not just a government issue. That's a cultural issue. That's a nationwide issue where I have a responsibility. If I disagree with you now, Tim, am I to come and hit you a mic in your head?
I will run.
No. And so I have a responsibility, and the government has a responsibility to ensure that there are laws in place and there's enforceability of those laws so that I would know there's consequences for them. But as a young person, I came from a background, and I'll share my business where it's concerned. I probably got suspended about 3 times.
Me too.
Yeah, the fourth would have been expulsion,
Hey, buddy.
And what would have got me on the right track? It wasn't a government policy.
Right.
It wasn't an NGO that say, hey, I see as a fighter, come and help me. I had a crush on my school teacher, my form teacher, and she said, I expect much more from you. No, understand this. All of us have a part to play, in what we speak to those young persons about. So in terms of, I'm in Form 3 and I'm in front of my teacher and my mother was there and she's saying, Mikhael could do so much better. I am disappointed. Note that she didn't know I have a crush on her, but I just the ways were disappointed my teacher. And from Form 4 to Form 5, I became a prefect, governing the Form 4 and Form 5 block and actually advocating against violence and dispute. I was once there, and it took one person who didn't have the state resource. It took one person who didn't have the NGO resource to come and say, hey, I want you to change. And then I had influence over different persons because I was a sergeant with the cadet force, so I have 30 young men under my charge. I was able to spread that. I believe that, yes, things are being done, and I'm sure Darren will speak on what is being done. But again, the question is, if more can be done, more can always be done. But I want us to take a responsibility, personal responsibility. Even on the road, the most peaceable person that you know, put them on the road. Trinidad and Tobago has some road rage. But again, taking personal responsibility as a young person to choose the opportunity over violence, being educated as well where that's concerned, is a holistic one.
Darrion, your name call.
I just want to say I love what was presented there. I think the idea of personal responsibility is very important. I wanted to also probably lead down a different path towards the idea of education also being a very important tool in the schools, but also having educators be, for example, trauma-informed, having educators be at least like first aid, mental health and psychosocial first aid informed, because he just mentioned there what changed his path. It was an educator who said, I expected more from you, knew how to communicate with him, knew how to relate to him there, and then he decided, at that point, I'll take personal responsibility at that point because somebody believed in him. And I think we don't understand how much just somebody believing in you can make such a big difference. I work with a lot of young people, a lot of children and teenagers, probably thousands over the years, yeah? And every time I have interactions, they said, and you ask them, you know, what was something that inspired you? They would always relate back to an educator. They would say, well, you know, it's when my teacher took this interest in me. Some of the biggest stories across the globe, some of the most successful people, they will always say, it started in school. A teacher believed, you just said it yourself as well. Mr. Raja, you know, you bring him up there and stuff. I don't know who he is, but
I hope it was Mr. Raja and I quoted the right teacher.
Yeah. But for example, he helped you in terms of inspiring your
Definitely
artistic style and your artistic way forward. So you could see how important having informed educators is as we move forward as a nation and how that could combat crime. I don't think the solution for crime is a 10-year solution. I think it's a generational solution. So if we start now, they say it takes about 7 decades before something becomes the new culture. For a culture to change, it takes about 7 decades. So we could start the work now and look for incremental steps towards betterment.
Khaleem.
I just want to put something, two things into perspective. One, in terms of the phrasing of this question, we tend to talk about education being the thing to deter people from crime. Let us acknowledge that there are a lot of educated people who engage in criminal activity.
Most definitely.
Crime is not limited or restricted to violence. Crime is not limited and restricted to people who are uneducated or undereducated. Crime exists all around us.
Well said.
Let's also acknowledge the fact that when we talk about crime, we talk about crime until it falls on us. We talk about crime and we vex about the violence and the murders and the this and the that, but we driving with no seatbelt, we texting on the phone, we talking on the phone while we driving. We hate corruption until we could personally benefit from corruption because you don't want to stand in a line or you don't want to wait your turn in the line to get the government service, so you grease somebody's palm. And you might think that doesn't have an impact on crime, but it does because you are creating a system and a culture where rules only matter if I benefit from it. If it's working against me, I against that. And so when you have that kind of mindset, you create a culture that does not respect accountability. You create a culture where law enforcement ain't gonna do anything about it because everybody just accepting things for what it is, 1. 2, people complaining about crime, but they're perpetrating crime themselves. And you know, as was mentioned earlier, we have to take personal responsibility. I know there's a speech Mia Motley gave about crime in Barbados, and she talked about if you know your child coming home with a school bag that you didn't buy for your child, or your child coming home with pens and pencils you didn't buy, or they have money to pay for things that you ain't giving them, stop and ask yourself, where my child getting those things from? And as Darrion mentioned, it starts with intervention. Intervention needs to come from school, it needs to come from your teachers, it needs to come from your family, it needs to come from your community, but it also needs to come from within yourself.
Do you also think we need intervention in the media? And I ask that question, it's a two-part question, because many people believe that the media has a part to play in influencing the minds of the young people towards going towards a certain lifestyle that is glorified on social media. Also, not just, because I'm not going to go down the avenue of the Trinidad music and the expressions and whatnot and so forth, but just that fast life, that I want to be the success that I want to be immediately and right now. I need to have a Ferrari, or I need to have any one of these things that would cause a young person to see a life that maybe is one that we would all walk, where we would, finish school, get a job, and do things like that, or go into entrepreneurship or anything like that. Maybe that might be a little bit lackluster for them because of what they're seeing on social media. So do you think there has to be some intervention there, as we are a growing society and is yet to catch up to those who have developed a lot more than us, for want of a better word, and are already there with social media?
Hard work isn't attractive. It never is.
It's quite ugly.
Because many of us who are on the panel would have gone through studies, but we don't ever go and post the nights where we had mental breakdowns. We don't go and post when it's just rough and we cry and we need to call somebody to say, hey, I want to give up. Who want to post that? But what we post is when we cross the podium, when we receive the certificate, when we finally got the, whatever we're looking for, we post the destination as opposed to the journey. And young people today, some of us, not all, some of us are so sold by this destination that when the hard work is there to put in, we don't want to put in because no one tells us about it. I'm eager to hear Ali, Darrion, Reneé, Kemuel's story. But the highlight of the story, you'll have the biggest congratulations at the end because you made it. And very few, probably a handful of persons, will be there to tell you, get up and keep going. So in the media, I think is a cycle we'll be in, because I don't think, are you ready to post your most demoralizing story and then show your outcome like that?
Well, everybody saw that when I fell off the stage in Soca Monarch, but go ahead. Yes.
Right. But I'm sure there are times where you felt as if you're giving up, like, I can't go anymore. And you just sit down and you're in a slump. No makeup, no nothing, no suit. You rawest version of yourself. And nobody want to post that. So until we shift that culture and pick up that 7 decades kind of culture in terms of bit by bit, that the end product you see here today isn't done by just, well, I want it and I get it. I can tell you firsthand, I'm here today. I had worn shoes, church, school. When I started to wear a jacket, it was somebody else on a borrow and I never gave it back, so I stole it. And I wore that all the time until the black jacket became, you ever wash jacket and you see the white in it? Because
it started to get shiny.
Correct. And I go in every function, Ali, looking as proud as I can with that jacket that is not mine. But I had shame, because here's what, everybody else could have interchanged their clothes and I couldn't, and I came from that place. Tell me to post that story now? No, but I'll post to you when I bought my first blue suit and a red tie. And that's just the culture that I guess we have to break, but that's where we're at.
If I can add to that, I completely endorse that perspective. The saying, the grass is greener on the other side. Sometimes the grass greener.
That's how it looks to them, man. Yeah.
And you don't know, because you don't know. You are receiving the end product. You are seeing the finish line. You are not seeing the trials and tribulations that the person had to face. I mean, I could talk about the fact too that I have had a lot of great opportunities, yes, but I have been working since I've been 14 years old. And I've been working non-stop. A lot of people come up to me and they ask me, like, where is finding time? It's because while you sleeping, I grinding and I putting in the work and I doing what I have to do, because I have set certain expectations of myself and I want to see myself at a certain place, right? And I will say I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I come from very humble. I come from a separated family. And so from the age of 14, I've been working to help support at home, to help put myself through school, to put myself through law school. It's been constant work, constant sacrifice, and constant dedication. And that is the thing that people don't see. And so I think the media also does play an important role in it, because we will report about the big name people, we'll report about the celebrities, we'll report about the get-rich-fast people, right? But we don't spotlight the young people in Trinidad and Tobago who are doing the work, who are putting in the work. When we do post a picture of somebody achieving something, we're not asking them the questions about the journey behind the success. We're just talking about the success. And so you are teaching young people to idolize success, but to not idolize the struggle, and to not appreciate that this is a journey, it's not a start to stop kind of thing. You have to go from A to Z to go through the alphabet. You don't just start and just stop. And I think if the media and if young people put that in their mind that, okay, I seen this person driving a real nice car. I don't know if the person leased the car. I don't know if the person just went and posed by somebody else's car, but I seen the car and that's what I want. So we're not stopping to think about the before. We just want to know how we get into the finish line.
I just want to weigh in here really quickly. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge the two panelists who shared their story. I think that level of vulnerability, especially from men, is something that we shouldn't look over at all. So big that up one time.
Deserving of applause.
And thanks for that as well. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that somebody out there who will be watching that will be inspired by the two stories. I actually wanted to take a more macro perspective on this and talk about the actual change and movement in terms of media right now. So we're actually moving away from the glamour. So you'd have seen that influencers was a big thing and you have a massive following. We're moving now to micro-influencers. That's the new language. That's what people are going after. So looking at people with the under 10,000, maybe 10 to 20,000 people.
More organic,
more believable, more real. And actually, I was listening to something recently, and they said that during this revolution, what's going to happen is that we're going to move away from micro-influencers, and we're going to go into niche sections. And platforms like Discord, for example, is niche section where you could be famous on Discord and nobody in the rest of the world knows who you are, right? That's where we are. And because you have a niche specialty or a niche skill, you're able to relate to that particular audience. And that's what will happen. So people will start looking for not only more authentic people, but people who are also knowledgeable and can connect a multitude of topics in a way that's understandable and palatable to them. So you'll find like that might be the next generation. It's one theory that might be the next generation of influencers. So I have a very positive outlook on where influencer culture is headed, and I'm hoping that that's where it heads. So you have people who are a little bit more educated and more knowledgeable, bringing knowledge to the people as well.
Well, I love positivity, and I would love to continue with a lot more, but ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and this is where we close the curtains on a successful panel discussion with our talented and future-driven panelists. My name is Tim, and I want to thank you guys for viewing. Yes, especially you in our viewing audience. Give yourselves a round of applause. Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you to our panel. Give them a round of applause as well. And this was Ballot X. Even if not a youth leader, every youth has a voice, and TTT Limited is bringing those voices to you.